He said he was on a business trip, but the hospital called me instead, and what I found next would change my life forever. I froze the moment I heard the nurse's voice on the other end, calm but serious. My husband had been in an accident. The words felt unreal, like they didn't belong in my life. My hands shook, my chest tightened, and yet a small voice inside me whispered that something didn't add up. He had said business trip after business trip, and I had trusted him every time. But now, staring at the black strap of my watch, the one he always teased me about, I realized the calm in his voice was missing, replaced by silence, secrecy, and something far more dangerous. I raced through the streets of Manhattan, the city lights blurring around me, my pulse hammering in my ears. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't an accident, that the hospital call was only the beginning. And as I arrived at the hospital, the quiet halls felt wrong, the emptiness pressing against me like a warning. The room where he should have been was empty. No machines, no monitors, no him, just silence. And that's when the first spark of fear and clarity hit me. He hadn't been telling the truth. This is the story I have to tell you. My husband said he was on a business trip. I believed him. I packed my day with errands, meetings, and a dinner appointment I had been looking forward to for weeks. But the phone call came before I could even step into the elevator. The hospital. My husband had been in an accident. I froze, staring at the black leather strap of my watch, the one he always hated me wearing because he said it was too flashy. The nurse on the other end kept talking, but her voice was muffled, like I was underwater. She said his condition was critical. My mind screamed that I had to get there, that I had to see him, but my car keys felt like they belonged to someone else. I drove through the streets of Manhattan, my heels clicking against the floor in my apartment building. And then I stopped halfway through the ride. Something felt off. He had been gone for business trips before. But the way my gut twisted, the way my chest tightened, it wasn't panic, it was suspicion. When I arrived at the hospital, the receptionist looked at me as if I had stepped into a place I didn't belong. She handed me a folder and said, "He's here, room 502. Room 502. I ran. My heels left red streaks across the polished floors, and I could feel every head in the corridor turn toward me, as if they could sense the storm rolling behind my eyes. When I reached the room, it was empty. No machines, no beeping monitors, nothing. Just a hospital bed that had clearly been vacated in a hurry. I called his name. Silence. The chill of the air conditioning was nothing compared to the chill that settled in my chest. I had a terrible feeling, one I couldn't shake, that the hospital call was only the beginning. I drove back to our apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. I needed answers. I needed truth. And when I arrived, I noticed it immediately. The door was slightly ajar. Our apartment in Tribeca, where every corner held a memory, was silent. Too silent. The smell of perfume lingered in the air, but it wasn't his. I stepped inside, heels clicking against the Italian marble. And the living room told me everything before I even saw him. Papers, bags, and a pair of heels that were definitely not mine scattered across the floor. And there, in the soft glow of the evening sun, was the unmistakable shadow of a man, not my husband, on the couch. I froze, my heart hammering, and my mind raced through every possibility. Who was he? Why was he here? And why hadn't my husband called me? Then, a sound. Soft, deliberate, the kind of sound that chills your bones. A laugh. Not loud, not obnoxious, but a whisper of amusement. And in that laugh, I recognized it immediately, the sound of betrayal. I took a step forward, and that's when everything exploded. The man jumped to his feet, but it wasn't him I saw next. It was my husband. Alive, smiling, smug. And behind that smile, the truth hit me harder than any physical blow ever could. He hadn't been in an accident. The hospital call, the emergency, the panic. It had all been a lie. A twisted, carefully orchestrated lie. And now, standing there, I realized the game had only just begun. I could feel the heat in my face, my pulse thundering in my ears, and I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come. I wanted to throw myself at him, to demand answers, to rip apart the web of deceit he had spun around me. But I held myself back. I had learned over the years that anger without strategy was useless. And I wasn't useless. Not anymore. I slowly backed toward the kitchen, my eyes never leaving him, taking in every detail. The way he stood, the arrogance in his posture, the way he thought he had already won. And that's when I noticed it. His phone, sitting on the counter, unlocked, flashing messages. Messages to someone he thought I would never find out about. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the victim. Not tonight. Not ever again. I grabbed the phone, my hands shaking, but my mind sharp, and scrolled through the messages. Names, times, places. The details of his lies laid bare in front of me. And then I saw it. A plan. A plan to disappear, to start a life without me, to erase me from everything we had built together. That was the moment everything changed. The fear, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it all turned into something else. Something dangerous. Something I knew I could use. I called my father. Not to cry, not to beg. I called him because he had always taught me that power is measured by action, not emotion. I told him everything, every lie, every detail I had uncovered. And then I said words I never thought I'd say. Do whatever it takes, don't leave a trace. The next hours blurred. The city outside my window moved on as if nothing had happened, but inside our penthouse, the air was thick with tension. I watched, waited, calculated. Every text, every call, every whispered excuse from him became a weapon. And then, when I finally confronted him, I did so not with tears, but with a cold, deliberate calm that shook him to his core. He laughed at first, thinking I was still the same naive, trusting woman he had married. But then he saw it. The steel in my eyes, the certainty in my voice, the knowledge that he was no longer in control. And that's when the first crack appeared in his armor. By the end of that night, everything he thought he owned, trust, loyalty, even the illusion of control, was gone. And me? I realized as I stood there in the quiet aftermath that betrayal doesn't just break you. It can also make you unrecognizably powerful. The next morning, I woke up with a strange clarity. The betrayal no longer hurt. It sharpened me. I remembered every whispered excuse, every lie, every casual, "I'm busy with work," that had turned out to be another layer of deception. I dressed carefully, every movement deliberate, every gesture rehearsed in my mind. This was no longer about shock or anger. This was about control. I returned to the apartment while he was away on his so-called business trip. The door was locked this time, but I had the code memorized. I stepped inside, quiet as a shadow, and moved through the penthouse like I had been there 100 times before. I opened drawers, cabinets, his laptop, his phone. Every little thing spoke to me. And what I found wasn't just lies, it was arrogance. He thought he could erase me, manipulate me, and I realized that arrogance would be his undoing. That afternoon, the first message came. A friend of his, someone I had never trusted fully, sent me a cryptic text. "Be careful. You don't know what he's capable of." I smiled, not because I was intimidated, but because I already knew exactly what he was capable of, and I was ready for it. I decided to set a trap, one so elaborate it would expose every single secret he had tried to bury. I started with small things. I called his business associates, pretending to be a concerned client. I asked about meetings he supposedly attended, about deals he claimed he was closing. Each conversation revealed more lies, more deceit, more evidence of the life he had built without me. By the time I hung up the third call, I knew I had enough ammunition to dismantle everything he thought was untouchable. Then came the first confrontation. I walked into the penthouse as if nothing had happened, heels clicking, hair perfectly in place, the faint scent of jasmine trailing behind me. He looked up from his papers, and I could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. I didn't rush him. I didn't scream. I simply said, "I know everything." The room went silent. The only sound was the tick of the vintage clock on the wall. And then, slowly, arrogantly, he smiled. "Everything?" he asked. I nodded. That smile faded the moment he realized I wasn't bluffing. Over the next few days, I executed my plan with precision. I invited his closest allies, those he trusted, to what he thought was a casual dinner. But I had prepared carefully. Every detail of his lies, every manipulation, every secret betrayal was laid out for them to see. And when the truth came out, when the gasps filled the room, when he realized that the very people he relied on no longer believed him, I saw it, the look of defeat, of sheer panic. But the story didn't end there. Because while he was reeling, thinking he could retreat into excuses and lies, I discovered something far more dangerous. He had been hiding another life, a hidden relationship, so calculated it made my stomach turn. A life he had thought I would never uncover. And the more I dug, the more I realized just how deeply I had been deceived. I confronted him again, this time with evidence that made him pale. The words spilled out. Confessions forced from him under the weight of undeniable proof. And as he spoke, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not revenge, but clarity. I wasn't just exposing him, I was reclaiming myself, piece by piece, reclaiming every ounce of power he had stolen from me with his lies. And then came the ultimate twist. The hospital call, the supposed accident, the web of deceit. It was all connected to someone else entirely. Someone I never suspected. Someone who had orchestrated events behind the scenes, manipulating him as well as me. I realized that my husband was both villain and victim, and that knowledge changed everything. By now, the lines between betrayal and strategy had blurred. I was no longer just a wronged wife. I was a force to be reckoned with. Every decision, every move I made was calculated to expose, dismantle, and ultimately reclaim. And as I stood in the penthouse, looking out over the city that had once felt like a cage, I understood something fundamental. Power is not given. Power is taken, and I had taken mine back, piece by piece, moment by moment. The final confrontation was nothing like I had imagined. It wasn't violent. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, deadly, deliberate. I walked in, heels soft against the marble, and spoke. My voice calm, my eyes cold, unwavering. It's over. Everything ends tonight. And in that moment, I saw everything. The fear, the guilt, the realization that his reign of lies had crumbled. He was broken in a way I had never intended, yet it satisfied something deep inside me. As the night fell, I sat alone in the apartment, the city lights flickering across the floor, reflecting in my eyes. I thought of every lie, every betrayal, every whispered excuse he had given me. And I realized one thing. Life doesn't give second chances, but it does give clarity, it does give power, and it does, sometimes, give justice in ways you never imagined. I walked to the window, looking out over Manhattan, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders. I had survived betrayal, uncovered the lies, and reclaimed my power. And in that moment, I understood the truth. No one can control your life but you, and if someone tries, it is not weakness that saves you, it is strategy, patience, and the courage to face the darkness and come out stronger. The days that followed were surreal. Everyone around me seemed normal, moving through the city like nothing had happened. But I carried a secret weight, a knowledge that changed everything. My husband, the man I had loved, the man I had trusted, had built a life on lies. And the hospital call, it had been the first domino. And I had set the others in motion. It started with the small things. Phone records, emails, receipts. I traced everything. Every dinner, every trip, every excuse he had ever given me was documented. I realized how cleverly he had manipulated everyone around him, making it appear that I was paranoid, jealous, irrational. But I was neither. I was meticulous, deliberate, patient. I allowed him to continue, thinking he had the upper hand, until the moment I chose to strike. Then came the message from the hospital again, one I hadn't expected. "We need you immediately. He's here." My heart dropped for a moment, the old panic rising, but then I caught myself. This was no accident. This was orchestrated. Someone wanted me to panic, to make a mistake, to react emotionally. And I didn't. I prepared. I dressed carefully, every detail planned, my mind sharp as a blade. When I arrived, the hospital room was empty again. Nothing. Machines, beds, monitors, gone. I asked the nurse, and she looked at me as if I were a ghost. "He left hours ago," she said softly. "No one knows where." I clenched my fists, realizing that the game had expanded. This was bigger than him. Someone else was playing, someone who had orchestrated not just his lies but mine. I returned to the penthouse, my mind racing. And that's when I noticed it. Subtle signs that someone had been inside while I was gone. Papers moved, a faint smell of cologne, not his. A photograph shifted. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the thrill of discovery. Whoever this was, they had underestimated me. I didn't panic. I hunted. I followed the trail carefully, piecing together fragments of conversations, tiny inconsistencies, overheard whispers from his so-called friends. And slowly, a horrifying truth emerged. There was another woman. Not just a mistress, not just a casual fling, someone who had infiltrated our lives, manipulated him, and now was manipulating me. Every move I had made, every step I had taken, had been watched, assessed, challenged. The confrontation was inevitable. I waited until the moment was perfect, until the city slept and the apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then I lured him back, carefully, deliberately. He walked in, expecting confusion, perhaps tears, maybe anger, but not this. He froze when he saw me, standing calm, composed, the faintest smirk on my lips. "We need to talk," I said, and the weight in my voice made him falter. The revelations came fast. I exposed the other woman's manipulations, showed him every lie he had told, every betrayal he had committed, every secret he had tried to bury. He stammered, tried to explain, but it was too late. I had all the proof, all the leverage. And then the final twist. The other woman appeared. She thought she could intimidate me, frighten me, and I realized the depth of their arrogance. They underestimated me completely. I let her talk, watched her carefully, measured her reactions, and then I revealed something they hadn't counted on. Evidence, meticulously gathered, that connected them to illegal deals, financial fraud, and betrayals that went far beyond our marriage. Their faces went pale as I laid it all bare. Fear replaced their confidence, panic replaced their arrogance, and I realized that justice didn't have to come from outside. I was justice. I was control. I was the reckoning. By the end of the night, my husband was broken, the other woman fled, and the city outside continued, oblivious. But inside, in that penthouse, I understood something essential. Betrayal, lies, and deceit can feel suffocating, but if you navigate them with intelligence, patience, and calculated precision, you emerge not only unbroken, but unstoppable. And then, just when I thought it was over, another call came, from someone I had never expected, someone who had been observing everything silently. They said one sentence, and my stomach dropped. "You're stronger than we fought, but the game isn't finished." I hung up, realizing the story had shifted yet again. Someone else had been pulling strings, and I had only scratched the surface. That night, I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, feeling the weight of what I had uncovered, what I had endured, and what was still to come. I knew one thing with absolute certainty: no one could deceive me again. No one could manipulate me, control me, or undermine me. I had survived betrayal, orchestrated my revenge, and reclaimed my power. And in that reclamation, I discovered something terrifying, exhilarating, and liberating. I was untouchable. Every day after that, I walked through the city with a sense of clarity and purpose I had never known. Each person I encountered, each lie I uncovered, each secret revealed only reinforced the fact that the world is a game, and I had learned the rules faster than anyone else. My husband, the hospital call, the betrayal, the secrets, it had all led to this. Me, standing stronger, smarter, more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And as I looked out over Manhattan one final time that night, I whispered to myself, a warning and a promise. No one plays with me and gets away with it. Not ever. The next morning, I awoke to the quiet hum of the city, but something felt different. A shadow of unease lingered, subtle yet persistent. I poured my coffee, letting the steam rise slowly, watching it curl in the early sunlight, and I realized that survival wasn't enough anymore. I needed answers. I needed the full truth, and that truth was buried deeper than I had imagined. I went through the apartment methodically, room by room, noting every slight change, every irregularity. Something had shifted while I slept. A drawer slightly open, a photograph tilted, the faint scent of perfume, not mine, drifting in the air. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with anticipation. Whoever was in my life, whoever had tried to manipulate, deceive, and trap me, had underestimated my resolve. I pulled out his laptop. His password was weak, predictable even after all these years, and when I entered it, I uncovered things that made my blood run cold. Emails to unknown recipients, transactions I didn't recognize, and plans that involved people I hadn't even met. He had been running an entire double life, one more dangerous, more calculated than anything I could have imagined. And I had been blind. Until now. I knew I had to act carefully. One wrong move, one hint that I knew, and he, or whoever was controlling him, could disappear again, leaving me with nothing but questions and anger. So I crafted my plan, step by step, measuring every action, every reaction. I began to contact people he had involved in his schemes, pretending to be concerned, sympathetic even, all the while gathering information, connecting dots that no one had realized were connected. The deeper I dug, the darker the story became. Not just lies, not just betrayal, but manipulation, threats, even criminal activity that stretched far beyond the walls of our apartment. And the realization hit me like a physical blow. This was no longer just about him. It was about power, control, and survival. And if I wanted to emerge unscathed, I would have to play smarter. Then came the first direct confrontation in days. He returned expecting silence, perhaps confusion, maybe anger, but not this. I met him in the living room, my stance calm, collected, my eyes sharp. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He looked at me, confused at first, then suspicious, finally fearful. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that I was no longer naive, no longer trusting blindly, no longer predictable. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply laid out what I had uncovered, fact by fact, evidence after evidence, each revelation cutting deeper than the last. His confidence faltered. He tried to explain, to justify, to manipulate, but I had anticipated it all. And when he realized that I had not only uncovered the truth, but had also prepared for every contingency, he panicked. But then came the twist I hadn't expected. A visitor. Someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had been orchestrating events from behind the scenes. A shadow I hadn't accounted for. They stepped into the penthouse, confident, smiling, and the way they looked at me made my pulse race. "You're stronger than we thought," they said. But the game isn't over. I realized in that instant that this was bigger than me, bigger than him, bigger than anything I had imagined. And yet, the fear I felt was not of them. It was of failing, of being unprepared. But I wouldn't fail. I had spent days, nights, hours, planning, analyzing, preparing. I was ready. The confrontation escalated quickly. Secrets, threats, manipulation. It all spilled out like a storm. Every lie was exposed. Every betrayal revealed, every hidden agenda brought to light. I watched their arrogance crumble as they realized I had anticipated their every move. And then, finally, I struck, not with violence, but with strategy. I set them against each other, turned their lies back on themselves, and in that chaos, I reclaimed the power they had tried to steal from me. By midnight, the penthouse was quiet. The city outside continued, oblivious, while inside, the air was thick with the remnants of deception, betrayal, and revelation. I stood in the center of the room, feeling the weight of everything I had uncovered, everything I had survived. I realized then that I had changed. I was no longer just a victim of betrayal. I was the architect of my own destiny, a force no one could manipulate or control. And then, just when I thought it was over, I found the final piece of evidence, a hidden folder, carefully encrypted, containing every transaction, every secret meeting, every lie my husband and his accomplice had ever plotted. And with that folder in my hands, I understood the ultimate truth. Justice isn't given, justice is taken, and I had taken it, piece by piece, step by step. Until the power was mine, I looked out at the city lights one last time that night, feeling the adrenaline slowly fade, replaced by a quiet, satisfying clarity. I had survived betrayal, uncovered the lies, outmaneuvered the manipulators, and reclaimed my life. And I whispered to myself, a promise and a warning. No one controls me, no one deceives me, and no one gets away with betrayal. Days passed, but the adrenaline didn't fade. I felt sharper, more aware, like I could anticipate every lie, every move, every hidden agenda before it even happened. My husband no longer dared to meet my gaze. Every word he spoke was measured, cautious, because he knew I had discovered everything. And yet, the real danger was still out there, lurking in shadows I couldn't fully see. Then came a message that made my blood run cold. No name, no number, just one line. You're closer than you should be. Stop now or you'll regret it. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile. Threats didn't scare me anymore. If anything, they fueled me. I realized the game had grown beyond the apartment, beyond him, and I would need to play smarter, sharper, faster than ever before. I started surveillance. Cameras, logs, even listening to subtle patterns. Every interaction, every visitor, every phone call. I turned my penthouse into a command center. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was anticipating, predicting, planning every possible outcome. And that's when I found it. A hidden network of people, connected to him, connected to the hospital call, connected to everything that had disrupted my life. The next confrontation was explosive. My husband returned late at night, claiming work, but I knew. I could see the hesitation in his posture, the flicker of guilt in his eyes. I confronted him, my voice low, precise. Each word calculated to unnerve him. Tell me everything, I said. He tried to stall, to charm, to lie. But I interrupted, presenting the evidence. Every hidden transaction, every secret meeting, every betrayal. His confidence shattered piece by piece, and for the first time, I saw true fear. And then came the twist I hadn't expected. The person behind the hospital call, the person orchestrating the lies, stepped out of the shadows. They smiled, confident, untouchable. You've done well. They said, but this is only the beginning. I realized then that everything I had uncovered, every move I had made, had been anticipated. This wasn't just about him. This was a war, but I didn't falter. I had learned to think 10 steps ahead. I exposed the hidden manipulations, turned his allies against him, and used the threats and lies as weapons. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was dominating. And the look on his face, the panic in the eyes of the others, confirmed it. They had underestimated me. They always did. Over the next hours, I dismantled the web of deception, thread by thread. Emails, calls, meetings. I traced every lie to its source. And each revelation was a dagger to their arrogance. They tried to regroup, to intimidate, to manipulate. But I had already anticipated their every move. I had become a force they couldn't control, a presence they couldn't ignore. Then came the final confrontation. My husband, the mastermind, and the hidden orchestrator all in one room. I walked in, heels soft against the marble, eyes cold, voice calm, deliberate. It's over, I said. And in that moment, I realized that power had shifted completely. They were no longer in control. I was. By midnight, everything was laid bare. Lies exposed, betrayals revealed, secrets no longer hidden. And as I stood there, the weight of the city lights reflecting in my eyes, I understood something crucial. Survival isn't about avoiding pain. It's about mastering it, turning it into power, using it to reclaim everything that was stolen. I had survived betrayal, outmaneuvered manipulators, and reclaimed my life. But more importantly, I had discovered who I truly was, unbreakable, unstoppable, and unafraid. And as I whispered to myself that night, the city sleeping quietly below, I made a promise. No one deceives me, no one betrays me, and no one ever will. The following days were a careful dance. Every time he thought I was distracted, I was watching. Every time he believed he had covered his tracks, I had already uncovered them. My husband was no longer the man I had married. He was a collection of lies and weaknesses, exposed under the relentless pressure of my scrutiny. And I relished it. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I deserved the truth. Then came the call that changed everything. A hospital, again. But this time, the voice was different, familiar yet cold. You need to come immediately. It's urgent. My heart skipped a beat, a reflex from the first time this had happened. But this time, I didn't panic. I didn't falter. I prepared. I dressed sharply, heels clicking against the marble. Hair perfect, mind razor-focused. I knew this was another trap, another test, and I was ready. The hospital was eerily quiet when I arrived. Empty halls, doors locked, no signs of the usual chaos. I walked toward the nurse's station, and that's when I saw him, my husband, sitting in a corner, pale, shaking, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. And behind him, the real orchestrator, the one who had been pulling strings from the shadows, someone I had never suspected. "You're stronger than we thought," they said, smiling. "But every story has an end. Do you think you can control the ending?" I didn't flinch. I had anticipated this. I stepped forward, voice calm, precise. "The ending is mine to write," I said. "Not yours, not his, mine." And then the room exploded with tension. Words, accusations, confessions, all coming at once. He tried to explain, to manipulate, but I held up the evidence I had gathered. Hidden messages, secret accounts, transactions, photos, every lie exposed. His eyes widened with fear. The orchestrator's confidence faltered. And I realized then that the truth, when wielded with precision, was the most dangerous weapon of all. I revealed the full scope of their plan, step by step, connecting dots they had thought were invisible. The hospital call, the hidden meetings, the lies, they all trace back to them. And as I spoke, they realized the game had shifted. I was no longer reacting. I was leading, controlling, directing the outcome. By the time the night ended, justice had been served, not by the law, not by revenge, but by strategy. They were exposed, powerless, and for the first time, my husband looked at me not with arrogance, but with fear and recognition. Recognition that the woman he had tried to manipulate had become something he could no longer control. I returned to the penthouse alone, the city lights reflecting on the marble floor, and I felt an overwhelming sense of clarity. Every betrayal, every lie, every secret had been a test, and I had passed. Not only had I survived, but I had emerged stronger, smarter, untouchable. I realized that life wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about mastering it, shaping it, using it to claim the power that was always yours. And as I stood by the window, looking out over Manhattan, I whispered to myself, a promise, a declaration, a warning. No one deceives me, no one betrays me, and no one ever will. I am the author of my own destiny, and my story will never be written by anyone else. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without fear, without uncertainty, without the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. I had reclaimed everything, my life, my power, my future. And as I closed my eyes, I knew one undeniable truth. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in destruction, it's in survival, in rising above, in becoming unrecognizable in strength, determination, and clarity. Because in the end, betrayal only creates one opportunity: to see the truth, to master yourself, and to emerge unstoppable. Even after that night, I couldn't rest completely. My mind was alive, constantly turning over every detail, every subtle hint, every whisper of deception. The trail leaves a shadow, and I had learned to walk through it without fear. But now I realized I had to uncover every single layer. There were still questions that demanded answers, and I was determined to find them. I began monitoring his movements discreetly. Every trip he claimed to take for work, every meeting, every business lunch, I traced it all. And slowly, the truth emerged. He had contacts I didn't know about, accomplices hidden behind facades of ordinary life. And more alarmingly, there were plans he had set in motion that could have destroyed everything I had fought to reclaim if I hadn't intervened. The next confrontation was calculated. I invited him over under the guise of reconciliation, because he was desperate, hungry for forgiveness, thinking I was still the naive woman he had underestimated for years. When he arrived, I let him speak first, let him try to charm, manipulate, plead. And then I struck, not with anger, but with truth. Piece by piece, I dismantled his defenses. Every lie he had told, every betrayal he had orchestrated, every hidden plan I had discovered. I revealed it calmly, precisely, with evidence he couldn't dispute. His reaction was fascinating. Panic, disbelief, fear, an entire spectrum of emotions, but no recovery. And then came the twist, the accomplice I hadn't anticipated. She had been silent, watching, waiting, confident in her control. But I was ready. I had tracked her, anticipated her moves, and I exposed her manipulations in real time, leaving her no escape. The shock on her face as her empire of lies crumbled was almost satisfying. Almost. By now, the lines between revenge and justice had blurred. I wasn't motivated by anger anymore. I was motivated by clarity, precision, and inevitability. Every action, every word, every gesture was calculated to reclaim my power and expose every deceit. And as I watched them scramble, trying to maintain control, I realized the true strength of my position. I was untouchable because I had learned to think like they did, to anticipate and to strike at the perfect moment. But then came the final, most terrifying revelation. Hidden accounts, secret communications, threats that extended beyond our lives, beyond the apartment, beyond the city. Someone else had been orchestrating events all along, someone whose identity I hadn't suspected. And in that moment, I understood that the game was far from over. This was bigger, more dangerous, more calculated than I had ever imagined. I called my father, not to panic, not to beg, but to prepare. The same man I had trusted before, the man whose power surpassed the law, now became my advisor, my ally, my shield. Together, we mapped every possible scenario, planned every contingency, and when they made their next move, I was ready. I didn't wait. I struck first, exposing their network, dismantling their schemes, cutting off their options one by one. The final confrontation was almost cinematic. I stood in the penthouse, the city lights casting long shadows across the floor. He, she, and the shadow orchestrator all facing me, expecting hesitation, weakness, or fear. But there was none. Only certainty, calm, and an unyielding presence that made even the bravest among them falter. I laid it all bare. Every secret, every plan, every betrayal. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply revealed the truth, and it was enough. Panic replaced arrogance. Fear replaced confidence. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Power isn't in hiding the truth. It's in exposing it at the right time, with precision and without hesitation. By the time dawn broke over Manhattan, everything had shifted. I had reclaimed my life, my power, my sense of self. They had been dismantled, exposed, broken, and powerless. And as I stood alone, looking out over the city that had once felt like a cage, I understood something essential. Betrayal can be devastating, but it can also be the spark that reveals your true strength. I had survived every lie, every manipulation, every secret plotted against me. I had outmaneuvered the orchestrators, the deceivers, the manipulators, and in doing so, I had discovered the ultimate truth. Life is not about avoiding betrayal. It's about mastering it, turning it into power, and emerging unrecognizably strong. That night, as I finally allowed myself to relax, the weight of the past weeks lifted. I had reclaimed everything. My husband's lies, the hospital calls. The hidden schemes, all of it had been turned against them, and I had emerged victorious. I whispered to myself, a promise and a declaration. No one deceives me, no one controls me, and no one will ever have the power to break me again. And in that quiet, reflective moment, I understood the ultimate lesson of betrayal. It doesn't define you. It doesn't destroy you. It transforms you. If you are willing to rise, to fight, to strategize, and to reclaim the life, power, and respect that were always rightfully yours. Even after the last confrontation, the tension lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still out there, watching, waiting for a moment of weakness. But I refused to give them that. I moved through the penthouse with deliberate steps, heels soft against the marble, mind sharp, senses alert. Every shadow, every sound, every phone notification became a piece of the puzzle. It wasn't long before I discovered another layer. The one my husband and his accomplices had kept hidden the entire time. There were financial transfers, hidden meetings, even threats that stretched far beyond what I had imagined. The deeper I dug, the more I realized just how calculated and dangerous they were. And yet, this only fueled me. I wasn't afraid. I was focused. I decided to take action. Carefully, methodically, I began dismantling their network. Every ally he had, every person who had aided his deception, I confronted, sometimes gently, sometimes with cold precision. Each revelation, each confession further cemented my control. By now, I was no longer reacting. I was directing, anticipating, and executing with surgical accuracy. One evening, I received a package. No return address, only a single envelope. Inside were photographs, documents, and messages I hadn't seen before. Someone had been watching me as well, trying to intimidate, to test me. But I didn't panic. Instead, I smiled. These people thought they could manipulate me, control me, scare me, but they had underestimated me completely. I used the information to my advantage, turning it into leverage, exposing more lies and unraveling the final threads of their deception. The ultimate confrontation was inevitable. My husband, his hidden accomplice, and the shadow orchestrator all came together, perhaps thinking they could corner me, break me, reclaim the upper hand. They were wrong. I walked into the room, heels clicking, posture composed, eyes cold and unwavering. "It's over," I said. My voice carried the authority of someone who had survived, strategized, and won. For hours, the tension stretched like a taut wire. Accusations, defenses, threats, they all spilled out. But every lie, every manipulation they tried, I had anticipated. Each revelation I delivered was precise, undeniable, cutting through their arrogance. Panic replaced confidence, fear replaced pride. And for the first time, I saw the true depth of their defeat. By midnight, everything was laid bare. The city outside continued as usual, oblivious, while inside the truth had been exposed. I had dismantled every plan, revealed every secret, and reclaimed the life they tried to steal. My husband, once arrogant and manipulative, sat silent, defeated. The orchestrator and accomplice had vanished, powerless and exposed. And I realized in that moment the full power of what I had accomplished. I was untouchable. I returned to the window, looking out over Manhattan, the lights shimmering like a reflection of my own transformation. Betrayal had tried to break me, manipulate me, and erase me. But instead, it had sharpened me, strengthened me, and revealed the woman I truly was. I whispered softly, almost to myself, a vow that echoed through the empty apartment. No one deceives me, no one betrays me, and no one ever will. As I finally allowed myself to rest, the adrenaline slowly faded, replaced by clarity. I had survived everything, every lie, every manipulation, every hidden threat, and I had emerged victorious. But more than victory, I had gained something far more powerful: self-respect, awareness, and an unshakable sense of control. The city below continued its endless rhythm, unaware of the storm that had raged above in a penthouse where secrets had been exposed, lies dismantled, and power reclaimed. I realized then that life was not about avoiding betrayal. It was about mastering it, turning it into strategy, and rising above every attempt to break you. I had reclaimed everything: my life, my dignity, my strength. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy me had instead made me unrecognizable in power, clarity, and resolve. And as I closed my eyes that night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept not with fear, not with uncertainty, but with the absolute certainty that I had survived, conquered, and would never be controlled again. Because in the end, betrayal is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of one. The beginning of strength, of power, of awakening. And I had become the author of my own destiny, writing every chapter, controlling every plot twist, and ensuring that the last word belonged only to me. And that is the truth. No matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how carefully someone plots against you, there is always a way to rise, to reclaim, and to emerge unstoppable. I am living proof.